Greetings, everyone. My name is Jeff Harpole. I pastor New Life Fellowship in Terre Haute, Indiana. And today I'm teaching a lesson entitled Transitional Leadership. I would like to first begin by offering a working definition of our session. We'll give the definition as follows: the process of moving the message forward. Transition is an interesting thought. It refers to change or development or a passage. Now, I'll present an analogy, and all of my points of the analogy are transferable except for one of those points, and I'll qualify that. And in a relay race where a baton is being passed, after you pass the baton, you stop running. So while all the other elements are relatable, just know that you never stop running. I'll revisit that in a moment. The first runner stops in the relay race, but when you are a servant leader, you never stop serving and you never stop ministering. So let me just cover 7 points, nuts and bolts of the relay race. There are always at least 2 runners, and sometimes there are 4. So just know that you are not alone. You're not meant to be alone. And you're always meant to share what you know with someone else. So don't be a loner. Number 2, you have to begin. There is a starting point, a beginning. And I do know that from time to time, we all have to begin again. Sometimes we have to reinvent what we're doing or just pause and say, I'm going to start one more time. A lot of diets begin on Monday and then, of course, the next Monday. A lot of resolutions begin in January only to be rehearsed or revised next year. So there has to be a beginning point. Number 3, there is one baton. That's a single focus or one vision or the single gospel. It is already established. It will never change. Number 4, there's a handoff. This is the period of time of transition. And we'll talk about that in a moment, the handoff, where the baton is handed from one runner to the next. Number 5, another element is that for a moment, both runners will hold the baton. This represents unity or a unified effort. Number 6, both runners will run together for a period of time. And that lends itself to pace or perfecting the understanding of the vision. In that transition, there is teaching that occurs there. And finally, number 7, there is the release where the second runner runs just like the first runner. So for all of you Bible scholars out there, just know Nehemiah did not build the walls around Jerusalem in 52 days. No, he did not. He rebuilt the walls. So a little play on words, just know this. He did not reset the boundaries. He did not redefine where the walls should go. He just set those big boulders back where they had already been placed. We do not redefine the gospel or the truth. We do not redefine the doctrine of Jesus Christ. It's already been established. Now, in this race, the most dangerous place is in the transition itself. The baton could be dropped or lost. If the handoff is unrehearsed, the race could be lost. If the 2 runners are not in sync, one is more confident than the other, the first does not give it over, the second does not slow down, pay attention to the first. If there's not a true release, there are many ways that the race can be lost in the transition. What is the pattern that we should follow? So how do we apply this to our biblical understanding and to our churches? Well, we can look right to the Bible and we can know that leaders lead other leaders. This was the pattern of Jesus Christ himself. He had a core of men. He had an external group of men, 70 disciples, not just the 12, but 70. And then there were a group of people even beyond the 70. In fact, we know that the number was larger than 70 because on the day of Pentecost, there were about 120. And that was enough to propel a phenomenal thousands and thousands of souls in a revival. It was Paul's pattern also as he developed other leaders around him, most notably his apprentice, his son of the gospel, Timothy. Even Moses made these transitional moves with Joshua because Moses considered himself a transitional leader. He put his hands on Joshua in front of the people and anointed Joshua. This gave the people confidence in the new leader, and the baton was firmly in his hands. Of course, for many, many years, Joshua followed Moses, so the transition looked like it was quick, but in reality, Joshua was a lifetime follower of Moses. Here are 3 areas of transitional leadership, and I'll have to go a little quick for the sake of our time. Demographic or age is number 1. Number 2 is technology or technological tools. There's going to be a transition in leadership there. And finally, discipleship development. We're going to have to transition a little bit in our development of our disciples. So what do we know? Before we get into our 3 areas, what do we know? We know that the early church had 2 forums to meet. One was in the temple, and that's the temple forum. And we're all very comfortable with that. In our age, that would be the church house or the properties or the church. And I say that in the small term of a building. But the second place the early church had was the home or the house. They went from house to house. They ate their bread with singleness of heart. They had all things common. They were in fellowship. So daily in the temple and from house to house. Now, a lot of emphasis has been put on the temple forum, the church house or the building, where processes and programs and properties are maintained. But I just want you to remember that programs will change and processes will even change, but principles remain true forever. So we always want to rest or trust in the principle. Now, we also know that we have to expand ourselves, and we have been expanding. And I submit that the house-to-house location only further strengthens the temple location. So instead of reading about how to make a better church, perhaps we should be writing about how to make a better home. I know for many years there were people who thought that the better the church was, the better the home would be. But I submit that the opposite is true. The better the home is, the better the church will be. One of the things I'm personally so happy about in our lives is that 2 of our 4 children received the Holy Ghost at home. They spoke in tongues for the first time at home. I want our home to have the same spirit of the Lord in it as our church house has. And I think what's happened here in this time of quarantine, although there's been many disruptions and some for the bad, it also has taught us that we have to have a spirit of worship and praise and the word in our homes. The gifts of the Spirit, the supernatural gifts of the Spirit, should be just as welcomed and prevalent in our homes as they are in the church house itself. Now, of course, this whole quarantine has made a lot of people uncomfortable. I've been uncomfortable. I know that those people that are high energy and high in charisma, those kind of leaders, this makes them very insecure. And those who do not and have not trained any leaders, that makes them very uncomfortable. So let's go to the beginning part. Let's begin. Let's start the race. And of course, people who are out of our purview, that can be distressing for us, but we have to begin. Now, just as a point of reference here, I am an ardent supporter of Hebrews 10:25. We must agree. We must gather together. We have to gather together. And it's important for us to unite as a body of believers. Things happen when we are together that may not happen when we are apart. So the Bible does not promote the idea of us never coming together. In fact, we should do it more and more as we see the day approaching. And we all know the day is approaching. This is a dress rehearsal for the end time. We're witnessing the prelude that is to come. However, perfecting the temple, that setting, has to be transitioned. We have to be careful that we didn't put all of our effort just in the church house itself. So there are a lot of transitions that are taking place. Now, to that end, let's discuss our first tool or element of transitional leadership, and that is technology. Just review the window that we're in. There's a propelling of the gospel through technology. It should be apparent by now that we've leaped forward. These last 5 or 6 months, 7 months have leaped us forward. We might have skipped multiple years, 2, 5, 10 years, who knows? But we didn't progress as one day after another. And so we're going to have to develop and use the tools and the technology to spread the gospel, perhaps in a way that we've never used it before, and many people are. So in an effort to move this message forward, we have to consider the various ways in which the gospel is delivered. I've done some surveys of a few dozen churches, and I continue to do this each week. And all of them that have a live stream have told me that they're reaching at least 10 times more people than they can fit inside of their church building. 10 times more people. Can you imagine? So not everyone sees this as needful, but I would just submit that videos, recorded videos, and live streams and other forms of mediums can be an incredible way, and you have to transition into what is available today, and we should be using these tools. However, if they're not done correctly, then they can make you look like something you're not. So this is important. This takes leadership to transition in a way that propels the gospel so that it can be received by the hearer. Paul told Timothy to study to show himself approved. He did not tell Timothy to wing it. David said to play skillfully with a loud noise. David was not promoting high volume. He was promoting skillful with a loud noise. So as it was then, so it is now. Study and skill, practice and things that are done purposeful. This means that we must present ourselves with intentionality. I'm talking about intentionality. I'm not talking about fake performances or performance-based ideas, but intentionality. Because 1,000 eyes are watching this coming weekend. I know 1,000 eyes are going to be watching a little church in another state. The pastor tells me he has a little less than 50 people, but he has over 1,000 viewers watching. 500 viewers watching, 500 to 1,000 viewers. Can you imagine that? So he needs to be intentional about how he's presenting the gospel. And I say that the apostolic message deserves our very best. It deserves intentionality. So we're going to have transitional leaders that will transition into that. So this first point concerns itself with leading with intention. So don't be afraid of the tools. They will not distort the gospel, but they can be a major factor in promoting what we believe as an exclusive doctrine. And our doctrine is exclusive. Now, all of these transitions that are pressed upon us have come swift. And it took some churches by surprise. People were running out to buy cameras and find out what kind of services they need, internet services, to minister to their own congregations. But in doing so, they attracted a host of other people that heard their message. This was a sudden transition. So I'll just offer you 3 points on technology. See the vision. You've got to see where you want to go, assess where you are, and adapt for change. And of course, you might have to accept the reality that you're heading in a new area. The second point of transitional leadership has to do with demographics or age. And this needs to take place in all of our churches. I'll offer you 2 ways that you have to do this. To perpetuate leadership in a church, you have to train and you have to trust. And the latter might be more difficult than the former. If you train and you trust, and then of course you're releasing the new leader to lead, you might be surprised at how proficient your student or your apprentice may become. But there are people who resist this training, trusting, and releasing. They do not do that. It's difficult because they love their position. I will offer you this. If position defines you, you're probably not a servant leader. If position is your identity, then you'll probably hold on to it at the cost of advancing other people, maybe even the cost of your own church growth. If you believe you're the only one for that position, then perhaps you'll never train anyone, and everyone will drown in the shallow waters of narcissism. Many have, and they continue to do so, but they do it at the expense of growing other people and ultimately growing their church body. So don't get caught in that idea that you're defined by that position. You see, transitional leadership is recognizing that the baton must be passed, but that you are not over. You don't have to leave the platform to make a good exit. As a servant leader, you will always lead. And I've found out as I've passed off different functions and ministries to other people that I've trained, another ministry opportunity opened up for me. I'm never without a position. I'm never without a job. I'm never without a purpose or a cause, ever. Now, we don't always do this, but in Numbers chapter 8, we found out, verse 24 through 26, that the Levites could not serve forever. In fact, in the tabernacle of congregation, they could serve before the people from the ages of 25 to 50. But at the age of 50, the Bible said they had to keep the charge. In my study, it looks like it means they kept the integrity of the younger men. Can you imagine if there was an age wherein we had to actually pass the baton off, regardless of how we felt? I don't know what those ages are, but I do know that we have to raise up another group of people that are younger than us, and God will give us what we need in our hands to perpetuate the gospel, and we'll never lose our purpose. In fact, the kingdom grows when we develop more leaders. There was a rabbinic tradition that suggested that there was a 5-year apprenticeship because in Numbers chapter 4, verse 3, the lower limit was 30 years old. And of course, Jesus began his earthly ministry at 30, and Samuel was another example of that. So between the ages of 25 and 30, there was apprenticeship, training. There's got to be training. And so that's the time when both of the runners are holding that baton. Transitional leadership has to do with the demographics of our church. We want to train our children. We want to train our young people, our young adult ministries, our singles, our young marrieds, our marrieds, our seniors. Everyone needs to be trained and trusted with ministry. And that leads me to my final transitional leader. See, it takes a transitional leader to move your church into new technologies. You are not sacrificing the gospel. You could be teaching holiness. You could be teaching doctrinal points. We're not reinventing the gospel. It's already been established. 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4, Acts 2:38. We know what the gospel is. The triad of our faith, we know that. It's the mighty God in Christ. That's one. It is the gospel. That's Acts 2:38, 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4. And holiness, being separate from the world. Those are the elements of our doctrine that was given to us by the apostles, instituted by God himself. So it takes a transitional leader to transition into these areas. And finally, number 3, discipleship development. There's a lot of conversation about discipleship, and it's wonderful. We need to talk about discipleship. But the development of the disciple is probably not as in-depth as you might assume it should be. Sometimes we hold back people from making another disciple because we're not sure if they're ready for it. But I would submit to you, if people know the basic tenets of the doctrine, they need to develop their own disciple. And you can still teach while they're teaching. You see, this is a transition not just for the new convert, but for the entire church. The entire church body needs to be turned into a gospel disciple-making vehicle. I'm talking about the entire church body. I'm talking about people leaving the comfort of their familiar membership setting and becoming disciple makers themselves. Some of our folks in our church, they know so much Bible. They've heard great sermons. You preach to them the most powerful sermons that anyone has ever heard. They know that. They've heard it, and they've probably forgotten most of your great thoughts. Now, we love pulpit presentations, and I'm not diminishing the preached word. I love the preached word. I'm a preacher. But I say that perhaps we've become too enamored with hearing someone preach, and we've given less effort to teaching or preaching that message to someone else. The early church did not think this way. They all thought of themselves as disciples. They never even called themselves Christians. Other people did. They considered themselves disciples or followers of Jesus Christ. The early church thought that Acts chapter 1 verse 8 was meant for them. They thought they all had power to be witness. None of them discarded themselves and said, well, that's not my personality. One of the things we've done wrong, I think, is we've specialized certain ministries, and we've specialized Bible study teachers. So you can only be in a certain category to teach the Bible. We have to transition away from that, and we have to develop disciples that can teach the Bible and perpetuate the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is going to take a transitional leader. You make a disciple by beginning a conversation. That's all it takes. You begin a conversation. And we have to lead by example. We lead in this transition by example. This means that leaders have to give Bible studies. We have to leave the building and find a friend. And so during the quarantine and COVID, we were pushed out of our buildings. So now perhaps we should recognize that even though the enemy can use this against us, there are lessons that God wants to teach us in this time. I just ask these questions. Do you have anyone around you that does not attend your church? They don't come to your church, but you call them a friend? Do you have anyone around you that calls you by your first name and not brother or reverend or pastor or elder or bishop? Is there anyone that you know and they know you by your first name? See, transitions have to change from come to my church to go to the field. Those are the transitions. So through technology, we have to have leaders that will lead us into new technologies whereby the gospel can be taught. Through demographics, we have to understand the power of passing on new leadership opportunities to other people. And finally, we have to develop disciples and disciple makers that can also perpetuate this gospel among their friends and change the focus of the church from come to get it all soaked in, I'm soaking it in, to pouring it out. These are major transitions. And of course, I've not exhausted them all. But in transitional leadership, if you'll discover these and work on them yourself, I know that God will lead you. Maybe just one of them could change the way that you think, and it will change the way that your church grows, because a church must grow internally before it can grow numerically. If it grows numerically, it will not stay in that number. So the stronger this foundation, if we grow internally, we will have a great revival and we will sustain the people that come to our church. I'm hoping that everyone will become a transitional leader. And I hope that you will review these points again and become a transitional leader in your own area.